It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not there in person, but pleasure to be here at the annual farm managers meeting. I have a long streak of being able to come here on an annual basis and give you an update on what's happening at Metropolitan. And I'm especially pleased this year because I come with good news about what's happening with water on the state and regional level. So let's see if we can get this going. Just by way of background, for those of you not familiar, I'm from the Metropolitan Water District, and we're the water wholesaler for a lot of Southern California. We have 26 member agencies over a 5,200 square mile area. And in those 26 member agencies are retail agencies and water purveyors, much like Rancho, California, who collectively serve more than 19 million people within that service area. In terms of water demand, 3 to 4 million acre feet of annual demand within the service area. And Metropolitan has provided about half of that water supply historically. So where does that water come from? This graphic basically shows that the watersheds and the sources of water supply for Southern California are spread far and wide. And so to start with, in the Metropolitan Water District service area, the local agencies provide a great deal of local supply in the form of groundwater, recycled water, desalination, both brackish and seawater, conservation programs, and the city of Los Angeles also has the LA Aqueduct, which they import water, and you can see the highlighted circle that shows the LA Aqueduct watershed. And so snow and rain in that watershed gets delivered through the LA Aqueduct and is considered locally provided supply from Metropolitan's perspective. Metropolitan was put together in 1928 to build and deliver water through the Colorado River Aqueduct. The watershed for that Colorado River Aqueduct is up, not surprisingly, in Colorado, Utah, in that upper basin watershed, and that accounts for about 20% of the water. Local supply is about 50% of the water. We're also a state water project contractor, Metropolitan is, and so there's the watershed that feeds the state water project. And on average, the state water project delivers about 30% of the water that's used. Important to note that the combination of all of these things, all of these sources of water, combine to help make our storage portfolio work. So, while in some years we may not have as much state water project water available, water that's coming out of storage probably formerly came from the state water project. Last year when I was here, I showed you a concluding slide that said 4 things you need to know going into, and this was April of 2022. So first thing was, I said, we were in a record-breaking drought. It was the third year of a really devastating drought and hot, streak of hot weather that was really affecting water supplies. We ended up having to impose mandatorily enforced restrictions on part of our service area, primarily the part of our service area that is heavily dependent on state water project supplies only. They can't receive Colorado River water. At that time, I said that your area, this area, because you had access to Colorado River water, would likely not be under mandatory allocations for Metropolitan for that year, and that held true. Salinity, which I know is a big part of the way water is managed here and water is used and valued here, that salinity was going to be for the imported supplies on the poor side because of that lack of state water project water supply. So state water project supplies are significantly lower in salinity than Colorado River supplies. And this area for the water it imported was heavily dependent on Colorado River water supplies because of the lack of state water supplies. And I also said, we all need to continue to conserve water, which your service area does, as well as any other service area, I would say, in the service area. So, so now to the good news, right? 2023 hydrologic conditions have been really eye-opening and a welcome relief and respite, a reset. There's all kinds of words that I can use for that to describe that California over the course of this year to date has been inundated with precipitation from atmospheric rivers, what they call atmospheric rivers. But in essence, there's been a lot of storms and a lot of rainfall and a lot of snow, and that has stretched from California all the way over into that Colorado River watershed as well. And so that should and will translate into additional water supply. So in terms of the snowpack, I'm going to start with the Colorado River. And so as of the 3rd of April, right, this graphic shows the upper Colorado River basin, where the snow for the Colorado River basically accumulates. So this is the indicator. The way you read this graphic, the blue shaded area on the graphic shows the average buildup of snow water content and the runoff or melt off of that snow water content in this basin. So you can see that snow begins somewhere in October or November, gets up to about 15 inches of water content on average, then starts to melt in the snowpack, through the June or July period till all of that water has melted and run off into the rivers or into the ground. This year, there is 23.3 inches of water content to date. It's past April 1st, hasn't started melting off yet. And that's about 160% of the April 1 or seasonal average. So, basically more than a year and a half's worth of average year snowfall is in snowpack in the upper Colorado River Basin. Not quite a record, just short of the record that was set in 1983 of 24.6 inches, but that could still be surpassed. In Northern California, there's kind of an interesting story I wanted to tell about rainfall versus snowpack. I think a lot of people have been talking about how wet it's been. And when they think about that, they think about rainfall. And they think about all the flooding that happened from the rainfall. And the rain has been impressive this year, especially compared to previous years. And so this graphic shows, again, in the blue shaded area, a range from the driest year, which was 17.1 inches of rainfall in Northern California, to the wettest year in history, 94.7 inches of rainfall. The average is 53.2 inches of rainfall, and currently there's 59.5 inches of rainfall. So that is actually just barely above average for the year, 134% of normal to date. So it is wet, but it is by far not a record wet year when it comes to rainfall in Northern California. That was 94.7 inches, and that was in 2016, 2017. And you can remember, if you recall, some of the flooding events that took place in that year. That was also the year that there was the issue with the spillway at Oroville. And I'm going to show you some pictures about that, about the new spillway that's been put there. So it hasn't been that wet in terms of, it's been wet, but it hasn't been record wet. So what actually happened with that precipitation and storm events? Well, it's all in the snow, right? It's all in the snow and the snowpack. And so in the Northern Sierra, there's been 57.7 inches of snowpack, which is 192% of that seasonal April 1 average. And so that's quite nearly double an average year, right? Which is really remarkable when you think about it, when we're coming off of 3 years of well below average snowpack, right? Well below average snowpack. And you can see the white line on this graphic shows last year's snowpack and how it built up to a little over 15 inches and then melted off and was pretty much gone by April 1st. Look at the difference in water content between this year and last year, and think that's in snowpack. So it hasn't fallen in the form of rain and run off into rivers yet. It's in the snowpack waiting to run off and be captured, managed, and used by the water systems. That was the Northern Sierra, the 192% of normal, but it's even more remarkable in the central and south mountain ranges and Sierras in California. So you can see that it's 237% of normal in basically the Central Sierra, and that's an indicator of how much snow there is in the San Joaquin River watershed. And then as you move a little bit further south, that Los Angeles Aqueduct watershed is at 300% of April 1 average. Now that's really impressive, right? That's 3 years of average snowfall, and by far its records being broken in that southern Sierra region. So not quite a record in the northern Sierras, but central and south are records being set for snowpack. So again, I'm going to reiterate, all of that water is in the form of snow waiting to melt. So we actually haven't seen the impact from that from a water supply standpoint yet. Even that being said, there's been a significant impact on the storage that we have within the service area. So this graphic shows Oroville Reservoir, which is the primary reservoir that stores state water project water from this, from the current year's runoff. And you can see there's a couple of different pieces of information. You can see the last year's storage in the water year from October to September, last year's storage in dark blue, and then the current year's water storage in the lighter blue. And so you can see that Oroville Reservoir, which is 3.5 million acre feet of capacity, was down under 1 million acre feet when the rain started to hit this year. That rain turned into flow into the rivers and was able to be captured in Oroville to the point where since December, late December and into January and to current, over 1.8 million acre feet of water has been stored in Oroville versus where it was started. That's pretty impressive. Whenever I start talking about hundreds of thousands of acre feet, those are impressive numbers. When we start talking about millions of acre feet, that's really impressive numbers. So you can see that it looks like the storage has flattened out, but that's a little bit misleading. The reason why it's flattened out is because water is being released from Oroville to maintain that last bit of space you can see between 3 million and 3.5 million of full capacity, to maintain that space in case of flooding so that water can be captured within that reservoir instead of flooding all of the downstream regions. That will be filled though by the end of the year, or actually within the next couple of months as the snow starts to melt and goes into Oroville. So that's really good news. That reservoir was edging towards empty, and now it's edging towards full. And so that's good news when it comes to water supply. I wanted to show this picture. This is the Oroville spillway. And a couple of interesting stats about this. So this shows water being released from Oroville to maintain that storage space that I had showed. And it's really impressive, not as impressive in pictures as it would be if you were standing there. What you see in this spillway is about 15 to 30,000 cubic feet per second of flow. 15,000 to 30,000 cubic feet per second of flow. So this has been going on since about March 10th. And since that time, about 900,000 acre feet has been released down the spillway to try and maintain this flood control space. 900,000 acre feet. And so just to put that in context, more water has flown down this spillway since March 10th than was allocated to the Metropolitan Water District in the State Water Project for the last 3 years combined. So I think that's pretty impressive. The amount of water that we're talking about is in there, and this is before the snow has started melting. This graphic shows San Luis Reservoir, which is on the State Water Project, but San Luis Reservoir is different than Oroville Reservoir. San Luis Reservoir basically is the reservoir that they pump water out of the delta into San Luis Reservoir to be allocated to the state water contractors. And you can see from this graphic, San Luis Reservoir was also near the empty side at the beginning of the year. Then as water started showing up in the rivers and in the delta, the State Water Project was able to pump and export water into San Luis Reservoir to the point where the State Water Project share of San Luis Reservoir has hit full. So there's 1 million acre feet of water in San Luis Reservoir, which means basically that to date, the project has exported as much as it can because it has nowhere else to put the water at this point. So from that perspective, the state water project is essentially quote unquote full from an export standpoint. So another way of thinking about that is the state water project has been able to export as much water as has been available to it so that it's full. And so that's about close to 700,000 acre feet of storage that has been gained at San Luis Reservoir. So how does that translate into our water supply and demand and our water management projections for this year? This graphic basically shows the state water project allocation in history and gives a couple of interesting facts about how this is going to translate into allocation. So you can see that, so Metropolitan has a contract for 1.91 million acre feet in a full year of allocation. So these percentages show the percentage of that full contract that had been allocated in historical years. And you can see that in 2006, that was the last time that 100% of Metropolitan State Water Project contract was allocated to it in a single year. You can see that in the rest of the years, it's varied quite a bit. You see 60% and 35%. So that's a severe reduction off of 100% allocation. But if I can focus your attention over to 2020, 2021, and 2022, this was a very low period of time in terms of allocation. In fact, we had a 20% allocation in 2020, a 5% allocation in 2021, and a 5% allocation in 2022. Going into this year, in December, the initial allocation for the State Water Project was only 5% again, right? So that was before the rain and snow started to accumulate. And so now as the rain and snow started to accumulate and water is being stored in Oroville and water is being exported and stored in San Luis Reservoir, there's been a series of allocation increases. So in February, DWR increased the allocation to 30%. The following month, they increased it another 5% to 35%. And then 2 weeks ago, they realized that the system is basically running full and there's a large snowpack and has moved the allocation up to 75%. That's a big number when it comes to state water project allocations, because again, we're talking about, roughly 2 million acre feet of a contract, 75% of that, is 1.6 million acre feet. That's the amount of water we have to work with versus the year prior. That was only 100,000 acre feet that we had to work with on the state water project. I'm going to tell you here that we're projecting that this isn't over yet, because like I told you, there's a couple years worth of snow in snowpack that has yet to melt. And so some studies have shown from DWR that the project may deliver 100% again this year. So that's pretty remarkable because that hasn't happened again since 2006. Another remarkable thing with the State Water Project has happened this year, and that was the availability of something that they call Article 21 supplies. So what are Article 21 supplies? Article 21 supplies are basically interruptible supplies that are made available over and above the State Water Project allocation that I just showed you. And this hasn't been available since I think 2019. And because these supplies are only made available on a week-to-week basis as available when the following conditions occur. One, when San Luis Reservoir is full, and I showed you that San Luis Reservoir had reached full. Two, that supplies can be pumped from the Delta. And so I had said that that the State Water Project storage was essentially full so that you couldn't really pump any more and deliver it into that storage. So what basically is happening here is those additional supplies that are allowed to be pumped out of the Delta are made available through this interruptible Article 21. And so, third condition is that when DWR is able to meet the contractor's scheduled Table A demands or their allocated supplies at the current allocation, and there's extra pumping capacity and San Luis is full, then Article 21 supplies are made available. So this year, these supplies were made available in late March. So this is the third week that it's been made available. I'm happy to report that Metropolitan has been allocated and has been able to deliver into its storage 83,000 acre feet so far, and has another 43,000 acre feet allocated and scheduled for next week. So over that 3-week period, we're expecting to have taken 126,000 acre feet over and above the expected Table A allocation of what is going to turn out to be 75 to 100%. So again, for context, in a 3-week period, we took more water from the Article 21 supplies than was available for the entire year through Table A allocation in 2022 or 2023. I'm sorry, in 2021 or 2022. So what does that mean in terms of supplies and demands? Well, here's a breakdown of our state water project supply at the 75% allocation with the Article 21 water that was made available, on top of the estimated Colorado River supplies of a little bit less than 1 million acre feet. Together, those supplies are about 2.26 million acre feet. And we're estimating demands right now on Metropolitan to be about 1.5 million acre feet. That means that when we look at our total supplies versus our estimated demands, there's about 747,000 acre feet of water. And this slide is actually a little bit outdated because that new Article 21 water was allocated yesterday, plus some changes in the demands that tend to be tracking lower. And so we actually are estimating that about 900,000 acre feet of water is available and will be put into storage in Metropolitan storage portfolio. So where is that water going to go? Here's our storage kind of broken out in different regions. And we started the year with about 2.3 million acre feet of water in storage, and it was spread in different places like State Water Project carryover along the State Water Project, some flexible storage that we have under contract with the State Water Project. I'm going down the left side. In-region storage like Diamond Valley Lake, out-of-region banking, some of our Central Valley banking programs like Semi-Tropic in Arvin Edison, some storage along the Colorado River with Desert Water in Coachella Valley that's there, and our Lake Mead ICS program. And so that's 2.3 million acre feet of water that was stored there along with the levels. And you can see in some places, storage was practically empty, like in our State Water Project flexible storage. We should be able to get the storage up to about 3.18 million acre feet with that 900,000 acre feet of water that's available. And so here's where it's going to go. We're going to fill back up those areas of storage that can meet the State Water Project dependent area demands. And so you can see we're going to put an additional 258,000 acre feet in State Water Project carryover storage, 216,000 in flexible storage, right? Then we're going to fill Diamond Valley and other programs locally. So that's about 300,000, 296,000 acre feet that we're expecting to put there, 140,000 acre feet in Desert Water and Coachella Valley groundwater program. And you see Lake Mead ICS holding at 0. So that's storing about 900,000 acre feet of water for a total of 3.18 million. But we wouldn't necessarily be adding to the storage in Lake Mead in our intentionally created surplus storage. And that has a lot to do with the issues that are happening on the Colorado River, which I can get more into detail later. Where does that kind of put us in terms of our storage? This graphic shows our historical storage levels. And it's really interesting to see how that storage has built up and dropped off during periods of wet periods and dry periods. So you can see in 2006, there was a wet period. We got our storage up to 2.2 million acre feet. And then there was a drought through 2009, and that was drawn down to 1 million acre feet. So we used 1.2 million acre feet in that dry period. In 2012, our storage was at 2.7 million acre feet. And that drought from 2013 to 2016 took it all the way down to under 1 million acre feet. Right, that's pretty significant in terms of the amount of storage that we took. But we were able to refill that again to that 2019-2020 period where we had 3.2 million acre feet. And then we drew out nearly 1 million acre feet again out of our dry year storage to manage those State Water Project supplies that we saw in 2021, 2022. This year, excuse me, we should be able to reset that. And I see that bar is a little bit lower than where it should be. We should be back up at the 2020 levels, meaning that we have, this year is giving us the opportunity to essentially reset our storage back to pre-drought conditions. So that's great, right? It's allowed us to do a couple of different things this year and really reverse some of the actions that had taken place to manage those extremely low state water project years. So our board has, we were under a water shortage emergency condition that was declared for the state water project dependent area last April. That was removed by our board last month in a reflection of the additional water supplies. There was a mandatory emergency water conservation program that was going on for that part of our service area also. They had mandatory outdoor water use restrictions and penalty enforced volumetric limits on their water use that they bought from imported water. That program was ended, so there's no more mandatory restrictions on water use anywhere in the service area. And one other important thing is, we need to continue to communicate, though, that even though this year and the hydrology and the snowpack has helped us reset our storage and put us in a better position to deal with oncoming issues are still out there, right? Our issues on the Colorado River are not solved, and state water project supplies in the future are subject to the same dryness and regulatory and environmental conditions that we've been seeing over the past 2 decades. And so those supplies are uncertain also. And so we really need to keep emphasizing that efficient, effective water use efficiency is important as we go forward, but also remove those emergency mandatory restrictions that we were forced to impose because of the water supply conditions. So this year I have 6 things you need to know, and this is my final slide. 6 things you need to know as a takeaway from this meeting, right? That the snowpack in California, it was indeed record-breaking this year. And even on the Colorado River watershed is close to a record and has greatly improved the storage that the drought has impacted the last 3 years. It's really rounding, but we really went from empty to almost a full reset projected for this year, right? We've alleviated those shortage and emergency conditions in the state water project dependent areas because of this availability of supply. That's the second thing. Third thing is that the Colorado River State Water Project blended area is going to have full access to higher quality, lower salinity imported water this year. So we're going to have state water project to be able to blend with Colorado River water and deliver to the blended areas this year. And that's good news. There's imported water that's available for local storage programs. Tomorrow there's a meeting, Rob had mentioned it, so that we can coordinate better with our member agencies and retail agencies to maximize the amount of storage that we can do with this water that is available this year, right? Fifth takeaway, future conditions in both the State Water Project and Colorado River will remain uncertain. And so rain or shine, we all need to continue to conserve water and use water efficiently. And that, in combination with our water management programs, helps to position us much better for the oncoming challenges that we know will come, but we have at least a temporary reprieve from. And with that, I think that's my presentation, and I'd be happy to take questions.